By late 1944, the Sherman tank had a reputation problem. It wasn't that it was a bad tank, it was reliable, easy to maintain, and America could crank them out faster than Henry Ford made Model Ts. But when American tank crews rolled into France and started running into German Panthers and Tigers, reality hit hard. The Sherman's 75mm gun couldn't penetrate German frontal armor at any range that mattered, and the narrow tracks meant crews were constantly pulling tanks out of mud. The earlier vertical volute spring suspension, inherited from the M3 Lee, rattled the crew's teeth loose on rough terrain and wore out faster than anyone wanted to admit. Something had to change, and it had to change fast. Enter the M4A3E8, better known as the Easy 8. This wasn't just another Sherman variant slapped together with a bigger gun. This was the Sherman finally getting the upgrades it desperately needed. The designation E8 referred to Experimental Device 8, the code for the new horizontal volute spring suspension system, or HVSS. Crews loved the smoother ride so much they started calling it the Easy 8, because in 1940s military phonetic alphabet, E was easy. Some people think it was named after the Ford V8 engine, but that's complete nonsense. Not all Shermans with the E8 designation had V8 engines, and plenty of V8-powered Shermans never got the HVSS treatment. The Easy 8 entered service in August 1944, just in time for the final push into Germany. Production ran from Detroit Tank Arsenal and Fisher Tank Arsenal, with 2,617 units built by April 1945. At first glance, you might not immediately spot all the differences, but look closer. The tracks are wider, 23 inches instead of the standard 16.5. The suspension bogies are completely redesigned. The turret houses a longer 76mm high-velocity gun. The whole package weighs in at about 32 tons, heavier than earlier Shermans, but the improvements made it worth every extra pound. Let's talk about that suspension, because this is where the Easy 8 really earned its name. The original vertical volute spring suspension was serviceable, sure. It worked fine when the Sherman was designed in 1942, but by 1944, Shermans were getting heavier with bigger guns, more armor, and combat modifications. The VVSS was showing its age. Springs broke after 500 miles of operation. The narrow tracks meant high ground pressure, so tanks got bogged down in mud, snow, or soft terrain. Crews complained about the bone-jarring ride over rough ground, especially at speed. Every bump transmitted directly into the crew compartment. The horizontal volute spring suspension completely reimagined how the Sherman moved. Instead of vertical springs on each bogie, the HVSS used horizontally mounted volute springs that connected pairs of dual road wheels. This doubled the number of road wheels from 12 to 24, spreading the tank's weight more evenly. When the front wheel on a bogie hit a bump, the compression force transmitted through the horizontal spring to the rear wheel, keeping tension on the tracks and smoothing out the ride dramatically. The system also included shock absorbers on the front and rear bogies, something the VVSS never had. The result? The Easy 8 glided over terrain that would have rattled a regular Sherman to pieces. Crews could maintain higher speeds cross-country without feeling like they were riding a mechanical bull. The wider tracks dropped ground pressure significantly, meaning the Easy 8 could traverse mud, snow, and soft ground where earlier Shermans would sink to their sponsons. The suspension was also more reliable, lasting longer before needing maintenance. And critically, individual road wheels could be changed without removing the entire bogie assembly, a massive improvement for field maintenance. But the suspension wasn't the only upgrade. The Easy 8 mounted the 76mm M4A2 gun, a significant step up from the 75mm gun most Shermans carried. This wasn't the short-barreled howitzer some earlier variants used. This was a high-velocity anti-tank gun capable of penetrating significantly more armor. Using standard armor-piercing ammunition, the 76mm could punch through 88mm of armor at 100 meters and 73mm at 1,000 meters. More importantly, when firing high-velocity armor-piercing ammunition, HVAP rounds with tungsten cores, the Easy 8 could penetrate 146 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters. What did this mean in practical terms? Against a Panzer IV, the most common German tank throughout the war, the Easy 8 was more than equal. The 76mm could reliably penetrate Panzer IV armor at normal combat ranges from any angle. Against a Panther, things got more complicated. The EZ-8 couldn't penetrate the Panther's sloped 80mm glacis plate from the front. That armor had an effective thickness of 140mm thanks to the 55-degree slope. But from the sides or rear, no problem. And if the EZ-8 gunner aimed for the Panther's turret front or the vulnerable shot trap at the bottom of the mantlet, even frontal engagements became winnable. Against Tigers, the situation was similar. The EZ-8 couldn't reliably penetrate Tiger frontal armor, but it could punch through the upper hull superstructure and definitely through side and rear armor. The key wasn't that the EZ-8 suddenly became a Tiger killer in one-on-one duels at 2,000 meters. It didn't. The key was that American tank crews no longer had to run away every time they spotted German heavy armor. They could engage, they could maneuver, they could fight back with confidence. And in real combat, tanks rarely meet on open fields at maximum range like some kind of medieval joust. Combat happens at 500, 800 meters in broken terrain, with buildings and hedgerows and forests providing cover. At those ranges, with good tactics and better crew training, the EZ-8 could absolutely win. The 76mm gun had another advantage: accuracy on the move. The improved HVSS suspension meant less bouncing and shaking when traveling over rough ground. The smoother ride translated directly to steadier gun sights, which meant better first shot hit probability. In tank combat, whoever shoots first and hits first usually wins. The EZ-8's combination of smooth suspension, good optics, and a powerful gun gave American crews a real edge in those critical first few seconds of contact. Combat experience proved the EZ-8's worth almost immediately. The first EZ-8s reached Patton's Third Army in early December 1944, just as they were preparing for an offensive south of the Ardennes. Then the Germans launched their massive counteroffensive on December 16th, kicking off the Battle of the Bulge. Patton famously pivoted his entire army north to strike the German flank and relieve the encircled 101st Airborne at Bastogne. EZ-8s were in the thick of that fighting, proving their reliability in some of the worst winter conditions imaginable. But perhaps the most instructive example of the EZ-8's capabilities came at the Battle of Arracourt in September 1944. This was before the EZ-8 entered service in large numbers, so most American tanks were still earlier Sherman variants. But the battle demonstrated exactly the kind of fighting the EZ-8 was designed for. Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division, mostly equipped with 75mm Shermans and some early 76mm variants, faced off against the German 5th Panzer Army, including 2 brand-new Panzer brigades equipped with Panthers and Panzer IVs. On paper, the Germans had the advantage: more tanks, better guns, heavier armor. But the Americans had better intelligence, better tactics, superior crew training, and air support. The battle unfolded in heavy fog on September 19th, which negated the German advantage in gun range. American tanks used terrain masterfully, taking up concealed positions and waiting until German tanks closed to effective range before opening fire. When Panthers exposed their thinner side armor while maneuvering, American tanks flanked them and destroyed them. Over 11 days of fighting, Combat Command A destroyed or damaged 86 German tanks, while losing only 25 of their own. The Germans committed their armor piecemeal, attacked the same positions repeatedly, and failed to coordinate their forces effectively. American tankers simply outfought them. This is what the EZ-8 was built for. Not to go toe-to-toe with Tigers at 2,000 meters in some kind of armored boxing match, but to use mobility, reliability, crew skill, and combined arms tactics to win the battle. The EZ-8 gave American crews the tools they needed: a gun that could hurt German armor, suspension that let them move fast and shoot accurately, and reliability that kept them in the fight. That reliability factor cannot be overstated. German Panthers and Tigers were mechanical nightmares. Panthers frequently broke down, transmission failures were endemic, final drives wore out rapidly, and keeping them running required constant maintenance and spare parts the German army increasingly couldn't provide. By the Battle of Arracourt, the 5th Panzer Army deployed 262 tanks and assault guns. By the end of September, only 62 were operational. 86 had been destroyed in combat, but 114 were damaged or broken down. Almost half the German tank losses weren't from American guns, they were from mechanical failure. The EZ-8, by contrast, was stone reliable. The 4 GAA V8 engine produced 500 horsepower and rarely broke down. The transmission was proven and dependable. The suspension was tough. American logistics meant spare parts arrived when needed. Damaged tanks were recovered and repaired quickly, and crews had the fuel and ammunition they needed to keep fighting. This reliability multiplied the EZ-8's combat effectiveness enormously. A tank that runs is infinitely more useful than a superior tank sitting broken down behind the lines. The EZ-8 proved so successful that it remained in American service long after World War II ended. When North Korea invaded South Korea on June 25, 1950, they brought over 120 T-34-85 tanks with them. South Korea had 0 tanks. American forces in Japan scrambled to respond, and the EZ-8 was the tank they reached for. The M26 Pershing and M46 Patton were available, but they were heavier, more complex, and less proven. The EZ-8 was plentiful, reliable, and crews already knew how to maintain them. In Korea, the EZ-8 faced off against the T-34-85, and the two tanks were surprisingly evenly matched. Both mounted 76mm and 85mm guns respectively. Both had sloped armor. Both had good mobility. The T-34-85 had slightly thicker armor and a marginally more powerful gun. The EZ-8 had better optics, better crew training, and ready access to HVAP ammunition. In practice, whichever tank shot first usually won. From July to November 1950, EZ-8s firing HVAP ammunition destroyed 41 communist tanks. Kill ratio claims vary, but the EZ-8 performed well, racking up approximately 47 claimed kills while losing 20 tanks, a ratio of 2.35 to 1. What really tipped the scales in Korea wasn't superior tanks. It was combined arms warfare. American tanks worked closely with infantry, artillery, and air support. North Korean tankers often attacked alone without proper infantry screening or artillery support, making them vulnerable to ambush. American tank destroyers and infantry with bazookas accounted for many T-34 kills. Air power was decisive, with fighter bombers devastating North Korean armor whenever weather permitted. The EZ-8 was part of an integrated system, not a lone knight-errant. Canadian forces in Korea also operated EZ-8s, and their after-action reports praised the tank's performance while noting areas for improvement. The biggest complaint? The tracks came off too easily when negotiating rough Korean terrain or making sharp turns. The HVSS suspension, while vastly better than the VVSS, still required skill to operate in mountainous country. North Korean wooden box mines containing 22 pounds of TNT were devastatingly effective against the tracks. Commanders requested more rugged tracks and suspension to handle mines better, but overall, Canadian tankers rated the EZ-8 highly for its reliability and firepower. By the time the Korean War armistice was signed in 1953, the EZ-8 had more than proven its worth again. But its service life was far from over. Israel acquired EZ-8s starting in the late 1940s and used them extensively through the 1948 War of Independence, the 1956 Suez Crisis, and even the 1967 Six-Day War. Israeli Armored Corps upgraded their Shermans continuously, eventually fitting some with the French 105mm gun and Cummins diesel engines, creating the Sherman M51. These upgraded Shermans remained in Israeli service into the 1970s, an incredible lifespan for a tank designed in 1941. Other nations operated EZ-8s for decades. The tank saw combat in the Indo-Pakistani Wars, various Middle Eastern conflicts, and was used by numerous armies worldwide. Some were even spotted in the Syrian Civil War in recent years, over 70 years after the design first rolled off the production line. That kind of longevity speaks volumes about the fundamental soundness of the design. So what made the EZ-8 special? It wasn't revolutionary. It didn't introduce radical new technology or rewrite the book on tank design. What it did was take a proven, reliable tank and give it exactly the upgrades it needed to remain competitive in late war conditions. The HVSS suspension solved the mobility and reliability issues that plagued earlier Shermans. The 76mm gun gave it real anti-tank capability against the most common German armor. Wet ammunition storage reduced the Sherman's infamous tendency to brew up when penetrated. The whole package came together to create a tank that was fast enough, tough enough, and reliable enough to win. The EZ-8 embodied American armored doctrine perfectly. American doctrine never expected tanks to primarily fight other tanks. That was the job of tank destroyers. Tanks were supposed to exploit breakthroughs, support infantry, overrun positions, and yes, kill enemy tanks when necessary, but as part of a combined arms team, not in isolation. The EZ-8 was optimized for this doctrine. It was fast enough to exploit success, reliable enough to keep advancing, versatile enough to handle infantry support or anti-tank missions, and produced in large enough numbers to replace losses quickly. German doctrine emphasized quality over quantity, resulting in magnificent but complex tanks that were maintenance nightmares. American doctrine emphasized quantity and reliability, resulting in tanks that were good enough and available in overwhelming numbers. When your tank is in the shop getting its transmission replaced for the third time, it doesn't matter how thick your armor is. When your tank burns through final drives every 150 kilometers, superior firepower is meaningless. The EZ-8 was designed to run, to keep running, and to keep fighting. That's exactly what it did. The myth that it took 5 Shermans to kill 1 Panther or Tiger needs to die. It's not supported by actual combat records. At Arracourt, the kill ratio was about 3.4 to 1 in favor of the Americans. And most American losses weren't from Panther guns, they were from anti-tank guns and Panzerfausts. In overall combat effectiveness, accounting for reliability, tactics, air support, and combined arms integration, Shermans consistently outperformed German armor where it mattered, in actually winning battles and campaigns. The EZ-8 represents the culmination of American tank development in World War II. It took the lessons learned from North Africa, Italy, and Normandy and incorporated them into a final form Sherman that was genuinely competitive with late-war German armor. Not in isolated one-on-one duels at maximum range, but in actual combat conditions where reliability, crew training, tactics, and combined arms integration determined victory. The EZ-8 proved that smart, incremental upgrades beat over-engineered complexity every time. When the first EZ-8s rolled into combat in December 1944, American tank crews finally had a Sherman that could go anywhere, fight anything, and keep running day after day. The smooth HVSS suspension meant they could cover ground fast and shoot accurately on the move. The 76mm gun meant they could penetrate German armor at realistic combat ranges. The proven reliability meant they wouldn't be sitting on the side of the road while their buddies fought ahead. That's what made the EZ-8 special. Not revolutionary technology, but the right upgrades at the right time, creating a tank that could win the war. In the end, the EZ-8's legacy isn't just its combat record, impressive as that was, it's that the design was fundamentally sound enough to remain in service for over 3 decades, seeing combat on 3 continents against adversaries the designers never imagined. It's that the HVSS suspension was so good that companies still manufacture variants for use in heavy equipment today. It's that tankers who fought in EZ-8s remembered them fondly as reliable, capable machines that brought them home alive. The EZ-8 was the glow-up the Sherman desperately needed. It got the beefed-up gun, the wider tracks, and the suspension that finally let it handle rough terrain without rattling the crew into another dimension. It proved that pragmatic engineering, continuous improvement, and focusing on what actually matters in combat, reliability, maintainability, and good enough performance, beats theoretical perfection every time. The EZ-8 wasn't the best tank of World War II, but it was exactly the tank America needed, and that made all the difference. Thank you for watching until the end. You can click in these other videos if you like this one. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and click the bell icon to be notified when we upload a new video. Have a good day.